There's something almost mythical about the samurai warriors who could stare down death without a hint of fear, their lives governed by a code so strict it became legendary. These weren't just soldiers, they were the soul of feudal Japan, shaping its politics, its culture, and even its very identity. But how did a group of provincial fighters rise to become the ruling elite of an entire nation? Their story isn't just about swords and battles, it's about honor, loyalty, and a way of life that still captivates us centuries later. Picture this, a world where a single moment of hesitation could mean disgrace, where every action was weighed against the unyielding principles of Bushido, the samurai's sacred code. This is the world we're about to step into. The samurai didn't start as the powerful lords we often imagine. Their origins were far humbler, rooted in the chaos of Japan's early feudal era. They began as armed retainers, hired by landowners to protect their estates, but over time, their role evolved into something far greater. By the 12th century, they had become the backbone of Japan's military might, their influence stretching from the battlefield to the halls of power. What set them apart wasn't just their skill with a sword, it was their unwavering commitment to Bushido, a philosophy that demanded courage, integrity, and absolute loyalty. To understand the samurai is to understand how a warrior's code could shape an entire civilization, but their legacy isn't confined to history books. Even today, the spirit of the samurai lingers in modern Japan, from martial arts to business ethics. Their rise was marked by brilliant strategies, fierce battles, and a cultural impact that still resonates. In this video, we'll trace their journey from provincial guards to feudal lords, explore the brutal realities of their warfare, and uncover how their ideals transcended time. This isn't just a tale of conquest, it's a story about what it means to live and die by a code. So let's step into their world where honor wasn't just a word but a way of life. The early samurai were far from the aristocratic warlords we often picture. They began as practical fighters, hired hands with blades who answered to wealthy landowners in the countryside. Imagine Japan in the Heian period, around the 8th to 12th centuries, a land where emperors and nobles ruled from grand palaces, but real power was slowly shifting to the provinces. Those who owned vast estates needed protection, not just from bandits but from rival clans eyeing their land. That's where these early warriors came in. Their name says it all. Samurai stems from the word saburao, meaning to serve. At first, they were little more than skilled bodyguards, but their role grew as chaos did. What set them apart wasn't just their combat skills, it was their adaptability. While the nobility in Kyoto busied themselves with poetry and court rituals, samurai learned the art of war on horseback, mastering the bow and sword in equal measure. They weren't bound by tradition like the aristocracy, they thrived in the unpredictability of the frontier, and when central authority began to crumble, they stepped into the power vacuum. By the 12th century, clans like the Minamoto and Tara weren't just serving nobles, they were challenging them, turning military might into political influence. But their rise wasn't just brute force. Samurai understood the weight of loyalty, forging bonds with their lords that went beyond simple employment. A retainer who proved his worth could earn land, status, even a family name, rewards that tied his fate to his masters. This system, called feudal ties, became the glue of samurai society. It wasn't just about fighting, it was about building networks of trust and obligation that could outlast any battle. And when the Genpei War erupted in the late 12th century, these bonds would be tested in ways no one could have predicted. The samurai weren't just rising, they were reshaping Japan itself. Bushido wasn't merely a set of rules, it was the beating heart of the samurai's existence, a compass guiding every decision, from the battlefield to the quietest moments of reflection. Picture a warrior kneeling in meditation before dawn, his mind sharpened not just for combat but for a life lived with unshakable purpose. The code's 7 virtues: rectitude, courage, benevolence, respect, honesty, honor, and loyalty weren't abstract ideals. They were lived truths. A samurai who failed to uphold them didn't just lose face, he lost his very reason for being. This is why seppuku, ritual suicide, wasn't seen as a tragedy but as the ultimate act of accountability. A final, defiant stroke of penance to restore honor when all else was lost. But Bushido's influence extended far beyond the edge of a blade. It transformed the samurai into Renaissance men of feudal Japan. They practiced calligraphy not just to write, but to cultivate patience and precision, qualities as vital in diplomacy as in duels. Tea ceremonies became exercises in mindfulness, where every deliberate movement reflected the discipline of a warrior's mind. Even their gardens were designed with Bushido in mind. Raked gravel symbolizing life's chaos, carefully placed rocks representing the steadfastness required to navigate it. The code didn't just demand excellence in war, it demanded mastery of the self. What's most striking is how Bushido blurred the line between life and death. For the samurai, mortality wasn't something to fear. It was a constant companion, a reminder that every moment carried weight. The cherry blossom, or sakura, became their defining symbol not just for its beauty, but for its fleeting nature. Like those petals, a warrior's life could be breathtakingly brief, so each action had to resonate with meaning. This mindset explains why samurai could charge into impossible odds without hesitation. Death wasn't failure, dying without purpose was. Yet Bushido wasn't monolithic. Over centuries, interpretations evolved. Some clans emphasized loyalty above all, while others prized personal honor even if it meant defying a lord. The legendary 47 Ronin, for instance, famously avenged their master's disgrace despite knowing it would doom them, embodying Bushido's most uncompromising ideals. Other samurai, like the philosopher Yamamoto Tsunetomo, argued that true courage lay in living relentlessly for one's principles, not just dying for them. These nuances reveal Bushido not as a rigid doctrine, but as a living philosophy, adapting to the complexities of human nature. By the Edo period, Bushido had become so ingrained that it shaped Japan itself. The warrior class, now administrators rather than frontline fighters, applied its tenets to governance. Honesty in taxation, fairness in judgment, restraint in power. These were the new battlefields. Even today, traces of Bushido linger in modern Japanese culture, from the meticulous craftsmanship of sushi chefs to the loyalty of corporate workers. The samurai may have vanished, but their code endures as a testament to the extraordinary power of living and dying by principle. Feudal Japan was a tapestry of warring states, where power didn't flow from the emperor's throne but from the edge of a sword. Imagine a landscape divided into hundreds of domains, each ruled by a daimyo, a feudal lord who commanded his own army of samurai. These weren't just military leaders, they were shrewd politicians playing a high-stakes game of territory and influence. A daimyo's strength wasn't measured solely by the number of his warriors, but by the loyalty they owed him. A single betrayal could topple a clan that had stood for generations, and samurai were often the linchpins in these fragile alliances. The Genpei War of the 12th century marked a turning point, the moment when the samurai class truly stepped onto the national stage. On one side, the Terra clan, who had grown wealthy and complacent in the imperial court. On the other, the Minamoto, exiled and hardened by years of struggle. When they clashed, it wasn't just a fight for land. it was a battle for the soul of Japan's future. The Minamoto's victory didn't just shift power, it redefined it. The shogunate they established placed the samurai at the center of governance, proving that military prowess could outshine noble birthright. But the real crucible of the samurai's dominance came centuries later, during the Sengoku period, the Age of Warring States. This was an era where castles rose and fell like autumn leaves, where alliances were made over tea and broken by dawn. Daimyo like Oda Nobunaga, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, and Tokugawa Ieyasu didn't just fight battles, they waged wars of perception. A samurai's loyalty might be bought with land one day and tested with impossible demands the next. Hideyoshi, the peasant who became a warlord, understood this better than anyone. His rise proved that in feudal Japan, birthright mattered less than ambition, and the willingness to wield both sword and strategy with equal skill. What's often overlooked is how deeply politics and warfare intertwined. A daimyo's court was as dangerous as any battlefield. A misplaced word, a poorly chosen alliance, even the wrong marriage could spell disaster. Samurai weren't just warriors, they were spies, diplomats, and sometimes assassins. The infamous night attack at Honno-ji, where Nobunaga met his end, wasn't a clash of armies, it was a betrayal from within, a reminder that in feudal Japan, the greatest threats often wore friendly faces. Yet amid the chaos, a peculiar code of conduct emerged. Even rivals acknowledged certain rules: seasonal truces for planting crops, respectful treatment of defeated foes who surrendered honorably. There was a practicality to the brutality. A daimyo who slaughtered indiscriminately might win a battle but lose the loyalty of the people he needed to rule. The smartest warlords understood that fear could only take you so far. True power required something more elusive, the ability to make men believe in your cause. And that's where the samurai's ideals, their Bushido, became more than just personal ethics. They became the glue holding a fractured nation together, one sword stroke at a time. The katana wasn't just a blade, it was a masterpiece of craftsmanship, forged through a ritual as precise as the strikes it delivered. Japanese swordsmiths folded steel hundreds of times, creating layers that made the sword razor sharp yet resilient, a perfect balance of beauty and lethality. But what truly set the katana apart was how it mirrored the samurai's philosophy. Its curve allowed for swift, fluid motions, turning defense into attack in a single motion, just as Bushido demanded adaptability in thought and action. To draw the katana was to commit. There was no half-hearted strike in the samurai's world. Yet the katana was only one thread in a broader tapestry of warfare. The yumi, their asymmetrical longbow, could pierce armor from 200 paces, especially when fired from horseback, a skill so revered it became its own art form, yabusame. Then there was the naginata, a curved blade mounted on a pole, perfect for keeping enemies at bay or dismounting cavalry. Even the humble tanto dagger had its role, not just as a last resort in battle, but as the tool for seppuku, the ultimate act of control over one's fate. What's often overlooked is how the samurai embraced innovation without abandoning tradition. When Portuguese traders introduced matchlock rifles in the 16th century, many daimyo quickly saw their potential. By the time of the Battle of Nagashino in 1575, Oda Nobunaga's ranks included thousands of arquebusiers whose volleys shattered traditional cavalry charges. Yet even then, the sword remained the soul of the samurai. Firearms were tools, but the katana was a symbol. Their true genius lay in how they wielded these weapons together. A samurai might open combat with arrows to disrupt enemy lines, switch to spear or naginata in the melee, and finish with the katana in close quarters. But their deadliest weapon wasn't steel, it was their mind. Psychological warfare, from the terrifying kabuto helmets adorned with demonic faces to the disciplined silence of night raids, could unravel foes before blades even crossed. Every weapon, every tactic served a single purpose: to win not just the battle, but the moment that came after. This versatility defined them. In one era, they were horseback archers raining death from a distance. In another, disciplined riflemen standing shoulder to shoulder. Through every evolution, one constant remained: their belief that mastery wasn't about the weapon itself, but the will behind it. A katana in clumsy hands was just metal, but in the hands of a samurai, it became the difference between honor and oblivion. Samurai armor wasn't just protection, it was a statement. Crafted from lacquered iron and leather scales laced together with silk, it weighed half as much as a European knight suit, allowing warriors to move with the grace of a dancer. The iconic kabuto helmet, with its sweeping crests and menacing face guards, wasn't just for deflecting blows. It transformed the wearer into a living legend, a demon or dragon descending upon the battlefield. Every piece served a purpose. The sewed shoulder guards rotated freely for archery, the shin guards tapered to avoid snagging in the saddle, and the flowing cloak of a commander's armor billowed like storm clouds, signaling his presence to friend and foe alike. But the true brilliance of samurai warfare lay in their tactics. They understood that victory wasn't about sheer numbers. It was about exploiting the terrain, the weather, even the enemy's superstitions. A favorite strategy was the turning crane, where a small force would feign retreat, luring pursuers into a narrow pass where hidden archers waited. At the Battle of Okizama, Oda Nobunaga used a thunderstorm to mask his movements, launching a surprise attack with just 3,000 men against an army 10 times that size. The result, a victory so audacious it reshaped Japan's power structure overnight. Psychological warfare was their specialty. Before dawn raids, samurai would sometimes tie bells to their horses' bridles, letting the eerie chimes announce their approach like spirits of vengeance. Others painted their armor crimson, not just to hide bloodstains, but to appear drenched in it from the outset. And then there was the silence, the unnerving stillness of a night ambush, where the only sound was the whisper of drawn blades. Their innovations extended beyond the battlefield. The concept of metsuk, or strategic observation, meant every engagement began long before the first arrow flew. Scouts mapped terrain, spies infiltrated enemy camps, and alliances were tested with deliberate misinformation. When guns arrived in Japan, the samurai didn't resist them. They mastered volley fire techniques decades before Europe adopted them. Yet even then, they never abandoned the intimate dance of close combat. A duel between skilled warriors could be as precise as a tea ceremony, each strike and parry a conversation in steel. What's remarkable is how their legacy endures. Modern special forces study their ambush tactics, corporate strategists analyze their use of deception, and their emphasis on adaptability resonates in everything from sports to cybersecurity. The samurai didn't just leave behind swords and scrolls, they left a blueprint for turning chaos into advantage. Their battles weren't won by muscle alone, but by the relentless sharpening of both mind and blade. The shift from warrior to ruler didn't happen overnight. It was a revolution cloaked in tradition. When Minamoto no Yoritomo became Japan's first shogun in 1192, he didn't overthrow the emperor. He created a parallel government where real power flowed through his military headquarters in Kamakura. This was the genius of the shogunate system. The imperial court in Kyoto kept its rituals and titles, but the samurai now controlled the land, the laws, and the taxes. Imagine a shadow government where every provincial governor answered not to aristocratic ministers, but to battle-hardened warlords who understood the price of loyalty and the weight of a sword. What made the Kamakura shogunate truly revolutionary was how it transformed samurai from hired blades into bureaucrats. They became magistrates settling land disputes, administrators collecting rice taxes, even diplomats negotiating with foreign traders. The Jito, local stewards appointed by the shogun, were often lower-ranking samurai who knew every farmer and field in their district. These men could read a battlefield as easily as a ledger, and that practical mindset reshaped Japan's legal system. Their judgments favored concrete evidence over aristocratic privilege, a radical notion in a society where birthright had always trumped merit. The Hojo clan, who ruled as regents behind later shoguns, took this further by creating Japan's first written legal code for warriors. The Gosubai Shikamoku of 1232 wasn't just about warfare. It detailed inheritance rights, debt repayment, even protocols for resolving conflicts between samurai families. Suddenly, the sword arm of Japan had developed a meticulous legal mind. Provincial courts buzzed with cases where a samurai's word was backed not just by steel, but by precedent. Yet the shogunate's true masterstroke was balancing change with continuity. They preserved the emperor as a symbolic figurehead while quietly redirecting all real authority to their military government. When Mongol invasions threatened Japan in the late 13th century, it was the shogunate that mobilized the nation's defenses, proving their system could protect Japan better than the antiquated imperial court. The samurai's reputation soared after these victories, cementing their role as both defenders and rulers. Behind the scenes, a sophisticated spy network called the Ninja Sokoku kept the shogun informed of potential rebellions. These weren't the black-clad assassins of legend, but intelligence gatherers who monitored regional lords and reported on grain harvests information more valuable than any battlefield report. The shogunate understood that to rule effectively, they needed to master not just warfare, but economics, agriculture, and human nature itself. By the time the Ashikaga shogunate rose in the 14th century, the samurai's transformation was complete. Their castles doubled as cultural centers where tea ceremonies and no theater flourished alongside military drills. The sword and the scroll were no longer opposites. They were two sides of the same coin. When later European visitors marveled at Japan's disciplined society, they were witnessing the enduring legacy of warrior statesmen who proved governance could be as nuanced as any duel. The shogunate didn't just rule Japan, they redefined what it meant to lead. The Minamoto clan's rise reads like a saga of redemption. After their crushing defeat by the Terror in the 1200s, they were exiled, stripped of power, and left to lick their wounds in the wilderness. But exile honed them. By the time Minamoto no Yoritomo rallied his forces, they weren't just warriors, they were symbols of resilience. Their victory in the Genpei War didn't just topple the Terror, it rewrote Japan's power structure, proving that even the mightiest clans could fall to those who bided their time. The Terror, once the emperor's favored protectors, learned this the hard way. Their arrogance became their undoing, their courtly refinement no match for the Minamoto's hardened pragmatism. Then there were the Tokugawa, masters of the long game. Ieyasu Tokugawa waited decades to strike, enduring humiliation and alliance alike until the moment was ripe. His victory at Sekigahara in 1600 wasn't just a military triumph, it was a lesson in strategic patience. Where others sought glory, Ieyasu calculated. His reward, 250 years of shogunate rule, a peace so profound it became known as the Edo period. The Tokugawa didn't just win battles, they engineered an era. But not all clans were defined by their victories. Take the 47 Ronin, whose tale bends the very definition of loyalty. When their lord was forced to commit seppuku over a petty insult, these samurai spent 2 years plotting undercover as drunkards and merchants, all to avenge a master already dead. Their final act, storming the offender's mansion in a snowstorm, was less about victory than principle. Every one of them knew the price: execution, yet they chose honor over life, etching their story into Japan's soul. Oda Nobunaga's legacy, by contrast, was written in fire and audacity. The first of Japan's great unifiers, he smashed tradition with the same ruthlessness he showed his enemies. When Buddhist warrior monks resisted him, he burned their mountain fortress to the ground. When rival clans clung to outdated tactics, he embraced firearms, revolutionizing warfare. Nobunaga understood that power wasn't just about strength, it was about shattering expectations. His assassination at Honno-ji, betrayed by a subordinate, only cemented his myth, the demon king who dared too much. What united these clans wasn't just blood or battle, but the way they embodied Bushido's contradictions. The Tokugawa's patience versus Nobunaga's boldness, the Terra's elegance against the Minamoto's grit. Each clan etched its values into history. Even in betrayal, there were lessons. The Hojo clan's regents, who manipulated child shoguns as puppets, showed how easily duty could twist into ambition. And the Shimazu of Satsuma, who centuries later helped overthrow the very shogunate system their ancestors served, proved that loyalty could evolve with the times. These names still echo because they weren't just families, they were forces of nature. To study them is to understand how feudal Japan's fate swung on the choices of a few ruthless, brilliant, and sometimes tragically flawed men. Their castles may lie in ruins, but their legacies are carved deeper than any blade could reach. History often paints the samurai as a brotherhood of men, but the truth is far more intriguing. Hidden in the shadows of castle keeps and battlefield chronicles were the onna-bugeisha women who wielded blades with the same lethal grace as their male counterparts. Take Tomo Gozen, whose name still echoes through time. Described in the Tale of the Hike as a warrior of peerless beauty and unmatched skill, she didn't just accompany men to war, she led charges, beheading enemies with her naginata while her long hair streamed behind her like a battle standard. Legends claim she once single-handedly held off an entire contingent of warriors to ensure her lord's escape, a feat that would make any samurai envious. The naginata became the onna-bugeisha's signature weapon for good reason. Its long reach allowed a defender to strike from behind barriers, perfect for protecting castle corridors or repelling invaders from horseback. Women trained relentlessly with these polearms, turning what some dismissed as women's weapons into instruments of devastating precision. When husbands and sons marched off to distant battles, it fell to these women to guard homes and villages. During the Genpei War, records tell of entire towns defended by onna-bugeisha who organized militias, proving that the front lines weren't always where tradition placed them. Their influence extended beyond combat. Hojo Masako, wife of the first shogun, became known as the nun shogun after her husband's death, maneuvering politics with the same shrewdness she once showed on horseback. She negotiated alliances, quelled rebellions, and even dictated military strategy, all while cloaked in the guise of a widow's piety. Her legacy reveals a truth often overlooked. The onna-bugeisha's greatest weapon wasn't always steel. It was their ability to wield power in a society that pretended they had none. What's most striking is how their existence upends modern assumptions about feudal Japan. While Confucian ideals preached female submission, the samurai class quietly acknowledged necessity. Scrolls from the Kamakura period show women in armor, estate ledgers list them as military assets, and clan histories celebrate their exploits. The difference lay in framing. Where men fought for glory, women were said to fight for duty. But when an onna-bugeisha raised her naginata, the result was the same, a blade that cut through both enemies and expectations. By the Edo period, as peace made warriors obsolete, the onna-bugeisha's role faded into myth. Yet their spirit endured. The last recorded female combatant, Nakano Takiko, led a unit of women against imperial forces in 1868. Her naginata flashing until the moment she ordered her sister to behead her rather than let the enemy take trophies. Today, her statue stands in Fukushima, a silent rebuke to anyone who thinks courage has a gender. The samurai world may have been built by men, but its shadows were guarded by women whose stories refused to be forgotten. Zen Buddhism didn't just influence the samurai, it rewired their very perception of reality. Picture a warrior kneeling in silent meditation before dawn, his breathing slow and measured, not to escape the world but to see it with terrifying clarity. This was Zazen, the seated meditation that became as vital to a samurai's training as sword drills. Where others saw chaos, the Zen-trained mind saw opportunity. Where most feared death, they saw only another moment in the endless flow of existence. That radical acceptance became their secret weapon, allowing split-second decisions where hesitation meant defeat. The connection between warrior and monk ran deeper than philosophy. Many prominent Zen temples stood near major samurai strongholds, their abbots serving as spiritual advisors to daimyo. The famed Rinzai sect, with its emphasis on sudden enlightenment through paradoxical koans, resonated particularly with the warrior class, a riddle like, "What is the sound of one hand clapping?" Wasn't just wordplay, it was mental combat training. By grappling with the illogical, samurai learned to bypass conventional thinking, a skill that could turn the tide of battle. Takuan Soho, the 17th century Zen master, famously taught that the mind must remain, like water, fluid in the moment, leaving no trace of past strikes or future worries. This fusion of spirituality and warfare manifested in unexpected ways. The tea ceremony, choreographed down to the placement of each utensil, became a meditation in presence. Archery transformed into kudo, where hitting the target mattered less than the purity of intention behind each shot. Even garden design reflected Zen principles. Raked gravel patterns around castle courtyards weren't just decorative. They served as walking meditation paths where strategists could contemplate campaigns with unclouded minds. Perhaps the most profound impact was on their relationship with mortality. The concept of mushin, or no mind, didn't mean recklessness, it meant absolute focus stripped of fear. Contemporary accounts describe seasoned warriors entering battle feeling neither anger nor excitement, their awareness so sharp they could perceive individual raindrops on a stormy battlefield. When the legendary swordsman Minamoto Musashi wrote, "You must become the enemy to defeat the enemy," he was echoing Zen's teaching of ego dissolution. Yet this mental discipline had practical battlefield applications. Ambushes required hours of motionless waiting, a test of endurance where Zen-trained focus outlasted ordinary willpower. Night raids demanded perfect silence, every footfall placed with mindful precision. Even the ritual of seppuku, often misunderstood as mere suicide, was the ultimate exercise in control, a final, flawless performance of will over instinct. The irony is that these warriors, so associated with violence, became some of Japan's greatest patrons of art and culture. Zen's influence pushed them to master calligraphy with the same intensity they brought to swordplay, seeing both as expressions of the same disciplined spirit. The ink paintings adorning castle walls weren't decorations but training tools. A single brushstroke capturing the essence of a bamboo stalk taught the same economy of motion needed in dueling. Modern psychology confirms what the samurai intuited centuries ago. Studies on elite athletes reveal how flow state, That zone of perfect focus mirrors the Mushin state Zen masters described. Special Forces training now incorporates mindfulness techniques startlingly similar to Zazen. The samurai's edge wasn't just in their blades, but in minds honed to cut through distraction as cleanly as steel through silk. When they said, "The sword is the mind," they meant every word. The world of the samurai wasn't just about clashing steel under open skies. Some of their most decisive victories happened in darkness, where whispers carried farther than arrows. While pop culture pits ninja against samurai as sworn enemies, history reveals a far more pragmatic relationship. Daimyo regularly hired shinobi, the proper term for these shadow operatives, not as rivals, but as specialized tools for missions requiring silence over spectacle. The Iga and Koka regions became famed for producing these masters of stealth, their skills so valued that even Tokugawa Ieyasu, the unifier of Japan, employed them as bodyguards and intelligence gatherers. Espionage was an extension of Bushido by other means. Where the samurai code emphasized honor in face-to-face combat, the realities of feudal politics demanded subterfuge. A daimyo might publicly scorn ninja tactics while secretly funding entire networks of informants. These operatives didn't wear black pajamas. They disguised themselves as merchants, pilgrims, or even enemy retainers. A well-placed spy could spend years embedding himself in a rival clan's castle, memorizing guard rotations and overhearing strategy sessions over cups of sake. The most valuable intelligence often came not from stolen scrolls, but from kitchen servants noting which lords received extra portions of fish, a telltale sign of secret negotiations. Assassination, though rare, was the nuclear option of feudal warfare. When Yusugi Kenshin, the legendary Dragon of Echigo, died suddenly in 1578, rumors swirled that a ninja had hidden in his latrine for days, striking when the warlord was most vulnerable. More often, shinobi specialized in psychological warfare, slipping into camps to leave poisoned sake barrels untouched, a message that no one was safe, or setting carefully timed fires to simulate divine wrath. At the siege of Hasido, a handful of ninja created such chaos behind enemy lines that an entire army abandoned their position, convinced they were surrounded. What's often overlooked is how samurai themselves practiced covert arts. Many trained in ninjutsu not to become shadows, but to anticipate them. The famed warlord Takedo Shinjin maintained a corps of Seppa samurai skilled in reconnaissance who could move unseen through enemy territory. Their reports shaped campaigns, proving that information truly was mightier than the sword. Even Minamoto Musashi, Japan's most celebrated duelist, wrote extensively about misdirection and psychological manipulation in his Book of Five Rings, acknowledging that victory often began long before blades crossed. The greatest testament to this shadow war's importance lies in its legacy. Modern intelligence agencies still study feudal Japan's spy networks, recognizing them as precursors to contemporary espionage tradecraft. The samurai understood what every strategist eventually learns, that wars are won not just by strength, but by seeing what others wish to keep hidden and striking where they least expect it. Their world wasn't divided into honor and deceit, but rather into whatever tactics ensured survival in an era where tomorrow's ally might be yesterday's assassin. The Mongol invasions of the 13th century struck Japan like a force of nature, an existential storm that threatened to wash away everything the samurai had built. When Kublai Khan's envoys first demanded Japan's submission in 1268, the shogunate didn't hesitate. Their reply was a beheaded messenger, a declaration that these island warriors would bow to no one, not even the ruler of history's largest empire. What followed wasn't just a military campaign, but a collision of worlds. the Mongols brought Chinese siege engineers, Korean naval tactics, and Persian-style composite bows, a terrifying arsenal that made traditional samurai warfare seem almost quaint by comparison. That first invasion fleet in 1274 was staggering, nearly 900 ships carrying over 30,000 troops. The samurai, accustomed to ritualized combat where individual prowess mattered most, suddenly faced an enemy who fought as a single, disciplined machine. Mongol forces used poison-tipped arrows, launched grenades of gunpowder and shrapnel, and employed shield walls that turned cavalry charges into suicide runs. Yet when they landed at Hakata Bay, something extraordinary happened. The outnumbered samurai adapted on the fly. They abandoned grand charges for hit-and-run skirmishes, using their knowledge of the terrain to ambush Mongol patrols in narrow passes. At night, they slipped into the enemy camp in small boats, boarding ships and decapitating officers before vanishing back into the darkness, a tactic so effective it forced the Mongols to anchor their fleet farther offshore. Then came the kamikaze. The typhoon that struck in August 1281 didn't just scatter the invasion fleet, it annihilated it. Contemporary accounts describe ships smashed against rocks like toys, drowning screams lost in the wind's roar. To the Japanese, this was no accident of weather. It was divine intervention, proof that the gods themselves stood with the samurai. What they didn't know was that another, even larger invasion loomed. 7 years later, Kublai Khan returned with a force 4 times bigger, over 4,000 ships and 140,000 men. The samurai, now forewarned, had built a massive stone wall along Hakata's coastline, turning the beach into a killing zone. For nearly 2 months, they held the Mongols at bay, their mounted archers picking off anyone who breached the defenses. When another kamikaze struck that November, it didn't just end the invasion, it shattered Mongol ambitions permanently. The cost was staggering. Modern excavations have revealed Mongol anchors and weapons scattered across the seafloor, silent witnesses to one of history's greatest naval disasters. These victories did more than secure Japan's borders. They transformed the samurai's identity. No longer just feudal enforcers, they became national heroes, their reputation for resilience etched into the cultural DNA. The invasions also exposed vulnerabilities, spurring innovations in mass warfare that would later shape the Sengoku period's brutal battles. Most importantly, they birthed the kamikaze legend, a myth that would resurface centuries later in Japan's darkest hour. For the samurai, surviving the Mongol storms wasn't just luck, it was destiny, and destiny, as they knew well, favors those who stand unwavering against the tide. The Tokugawa Shogunate didn't just end Japan's wars, it forced the samurai to reinvent themselves. After the Battle of Sekigahara in 1600, the country entered an unprecedented 250 years of peace under Tokugawa rule. For warriors bred on bloodshed, this was both a blessing and a crisis. With no battles to fight, their swords became symbols rather than tools, and their survival depended on mastering a new battlefield, culture. The same hands that once drew bows now practiced the precise brushstrokes of calligraphy, turning kanji into art. Tea ceremonies weren't just social rituals, they were exercises in discipline, every movement measured like a duelist strike. Even the no-theater's masked performances became a kind of warfare by other means, where subtle gestures conveyed emotions sharper than any blade. This cultural renaissance wasn't mere hobbyism. The Tokugawa system demanded that samurai serve as bureaucrats, their martial ethos channeled into governance. They collected taxes, settled land disputes, and enforced laws with the same rigor they'd once reserved for combat. The philosopher Yamaga Soko argued that a true warrior's duty was moral leadership, writing, "The sword that cannot cut vice is useless." Schools sprang up to teach Confucian classics alongside swordplay. producing scholar warriors who could quote poetry as fluently as they could wield a katana. The legendary Miyamoto Musashi, after retiring from dueling, spent his final years painting landscapes and composing treatises on strategy, proof that even Japan's fiercest swordsmen saw art as an extension of Bushido. Yet peace carried an ironic price. As the Edo period progressed, many samurai grew dependent on fixed rice stipends, their martial skills dulling without real battles. Some fell into genteel poverty, selling heirlooms to fund their studies or tea utensils. Others turned to teaching, opening fencing academies where techniques once tested in life or death duels became performance arts. The most astute adapted by marrying into merchant families, trading prestige for financial stability. By the 19th century, the once ferocious warrior class had become administrators in silk robes, their armor gathering dust in ancestral halls. What's often overlooked is how deeply this era shaped Japan's identity. The Tokugawa peace didn't just preserve samurai culture, it refined it, distilling violence into aesthetics. The minimalist beauty of rock gardens, the restrained drama of kabuki, even the intricate etiquette of gift-giving, all bore the imprint of warriors who traded battlefields for salons. When Commodore Perry's black ships arrived in 1853, demanding Japan open its ports, the samurai faced a cruel twist of fate. Their golden age of peace had left them unprepared for modern warfare, yet the very arts they'd cultivated would become the foundation of Japan's cultural diplomacy. The tea master's quiet grace and the calligrapher's steady hand proved as enduring as any legend of the sword. In the end, their greatest victory wasn't conquering enemies, it was redefining what it meant to be a warrior. To be a Ronin was to exist in limbo, a ghost of the warrior you once were. The word itself, Ronin, meaning wave man, evoked an image of someone tossed aimlessly by life's currents, no longer anchored to the rigid hierarchy that defined feudal Japan. When a lord died, fell from power, or simply dismissed his retainers, their samurai didn't just lose a master, they lost their identity. Stripped of stipends, land, and purpose, these masterless men faced an agonizing choice: starve with honor or survive through compromise. Some Ronin embraced the life of hired blades, selling their skills to the highest bidder. These mercenaries became common during the Sengoku period's constant warfare, their loyalty as fluid as their employment contracts. A daimyo might hire them for a single campaign, only to cast them aside once the battle ended. Others turned to darker trades, highway bandits preying on travelers, or enforcers for crime syndicates in bustling cities like Edo. The famed swordsman Musashi Miyamoto spent years as a wandering Ronin, dueling rivals not for glory, but simply to prove he could survive outside the system that had rejected him. Then there were those who clung to Bushido's ideals even in exile. The 47 Ronin story stands as the ultimate testament to this stubborn devotion. When their lord, Asano Naganori, was forced to commit seppuku after attacking a corrupt official in 1701, his retainers became Ronin overnight. But rather than disperse, they plotted for 2 years, some posing as drunkards, others as laborers, all to lull their target into false security. Their midnight assault on Kira Yoshinaka's mansion wasn't just revenge, it was a meticulously staged performance of loyalty. Every man knew the shogunate would order their deaths for breaking the law, yet they marched anyway, proving that Bushido's demands didn't end with a lord's last breath. What's often forgotten is how society viewed these outcasts. Ronin occupied a paradoxical space, pitied for their fall, yet feared for their desperation. Art and theater romanticized them as tragic heroes, but in reality, townsfolk barred their gates to wandering swordsmen, knowing hunger could turn even the noblest warrior into a threat. The Tokugawa Shogunate passed harsh laws forcing Ronin to either find new masters or renounce their status, a policy born less of cruelty than practicality. A warrior with nothing left to lose was the most dangerous kind, yet their legacy isn't just one of suffering. Many Ronin became scholars, opening schools where they taught everything from military strategy to Confucian ethics. The philosopher Yamaga Soko, himself a Ronin, reinvented Bushido for a peacetime world, arguing that true warriors served society, not just lords. Others found redemption through art, like the swordsman-turned-poet Ishikawa Jozen, whose Kyoto garden became a sanctuary for fellow outcasts. The Ronin's tale is ultimately one of resilience, proof that honor isn't bestowed by status, but forged in the choices we make when all seems lost. Their waves may have crashed against an uncaring shore, but the ripples of their decisions still touch us today. Whether through vengeance, reinvention, or quiet defiance, they proved that even a masterless soul could etch its name into history. Seppuku wasn't just death, it was theater, a meticulously staged performance where every movement carried meaning. Imagine a dimly lit courtyard, the condemned samurai kneeling on white cloth to hide the mess of his final act. Dressed in pristine white robes symbolizing purity, he would take up the tanto, a short, razor-sharp dagger, and compose a death poem, his brushstrokes steady despite the tremors of mortality. The moment the blade pierced his abdomen, drawn left to right in one excruciating motion, wasn't about pain. It was about agency. In a world where defeat often meant torture or humiliation at enemy hands, seppuku offered one last defiant choice: to die on one's own terms. The ritual's precision mirrored Bushido's unforgiving standards. A second, usually a trusted comrade, stood ready with a katana to deliver the mercy stroke, decapitation, just before agony could break the dying man's composure. A botched cut that left the head dangling was considered disgraceful. A clean strike honored both participants. When the legendary general Takedo Shingen's son Katsuyori faced defeat in 1582, he performed seppuku not in shame, but to deny his enemies the satisfaction of capturing him. His final words, "A warrior's value is shown at his end," epitomized the act's deeper philosophy, that how one died revealed their true character. Women of the samurai class weren't exempt from this code. Known as jigai, their version involved slicing the neck's artery after tying their knees together to prevent an undignified posture in death. When the castle of Aizu fell in 1868, entire families of samurai women chose this end rather than risk capture. Their quiet resolve proved that the weight of honor pressed equally on all who lived by the sword. Yet seppuku's most surprising aspect was its occasional use as political weapon. In 1691, the young daimyo Asano Naganori was ordered to kill himself after assaulting a corrupt court official, a sentence many believed unjust. His seppuku wasn't just personal atonement. It became a silent indictment of the system, sparking events that would culminate in the 47 Ronin's legendary vendetta. Sometimes the act's ripple effects were more powerful than the blade itself. Modern minds might dismiss this as barbaric, but to the samurai, it was the ultimate expression of responsibility. In an era where one's actions reflected on their lord, family, and ancestors, seppuku cleansed shame with blood. Even today, Japan's cultural memory of these acts lingers, not as glorification of suicide, but as a stark reminder of how deeply principle could run. When a warrior chose that white cloth over dishonor, he wasn't just ending a life, he was etching his final lesson into history's unforgiving scroll. The Meiji Restoration didn't just change Japan, it shattered the world the samurai had known for centuries. When Emperor Meiji took full power in 1868, his new government saw the warrior class as relics blocking progress. Swords couldn't compete with rifles, and feudal loyalties meant nothing to a nation racing to match Western empires. The Heitorei Edict of 1876 struck the final blow, banning samurai from carrying their cherished katanas in public. Imagine the humiliation. Generations of proud warriors suddenly forced to walk the streets as ordinary civilians, their once sacred blades locked away as museum pieces. Not all samurai went quietly. The Satsuma Rebellion of 1877 became their last desperate stand, led by the charismatic Seigo Takamori, a man who had helped overthrow the shogunate only to recoil at Japan's rapid westernization. 40,000 disaffected warriors rose up. Their tactics were brilliant, blending traditional guerrilla warfare with modern artillery salvaged from abandoned armories. For months, they held their ground, proving that Bushido spirit could still shake the foundations of the new order. But their rebellion was doomed from the start. Government forces, equipped with state-of-the-art Gatling guns and Prussian-trained infantry, cut down Takamori's rebels with mechanical efficiency. When the legendary warrior took his own life on the battlefield, it wasn't just a man dying, it was an era. Yet the samurai's end wasn't purely tragic. Many adapted with remarkable grace, trading armor for suits and swords for pens. Former warriors became bankers, journalists, even pioneering photographers. The famed swordsman Kawakami Gensai, once a feared assassin, reinvented himself as a Shakespearean actor, bringing Hamlet to Tokyo's stages. Others found purpose in Japan's new military, their discipline shaping the Imperial Army's officer corps. The irony was cruel but undeniable. The very virtues that defined the samurai became the tools that built modern Japan. What's often overlooked is how their legacy survived the Meiji upheaval. While the government abolished their legal status, it couldn't erase their cultural imprint. Bushido's ideals quietly infused Japan's schools, businesses, and even its colonial ambitions. The kamikaze pilots of World War II didn't invoke medieval knights, they channeled the spirit of the 47 Ronin. Today, their influence lingers in subtler ways: the precision of a sushi chef's knife work, the unspoken hierarchy of a corporate boardroom, even the stoic endurance of athletes bowing after defeat. The samurai didn't vanish, they dissolved into the bloodstream of a nation, their code outliving the swords that once enforced it. Their story leaves us with a haunting question: how do we honor tradition when progress demands its sacrifice? The Meiji leaders chose survival over sentiment, trading katana for locomotives. But in the quiet corners of modern Japan, from the solemn rituals of a tea house to the disciplined strikes of a kendo dojo, the whisper of steel still echoes. The samurai's world is gone, yet their shadow stretches long across history, reminding us that some values cut too deep to fade. Holly Wood's The Last Samurai paints a sweeping portrait of noble warriors making their final stand against modernity, but the reality was far messier and far more human. The film's fictional Captain Algren might embody Western fascination with Bushido, but the true end of the samurai wasn't a single dramatic battle. It was a slow, painful reckoning with inevitability. Take Seigo Takamori, the rebellion leader often called the last true samurai. This wasn't some lone traditionalist raging against progress. He was a man who'd helped overthrow the shogunate, then watched in dismay as the new Japan he'd helped build left his class behind. His rebellion wasn't just about swords versus guns. It was about identity in a world that no longer had a place for warriors. The irony: many so-called last samurai were architects of their own obsolescence. After centuries of isolating Japan, the Tokugawa shogunate's collapse opened floodgates to Western technology and ideas. Some warriors, like Katsu Kaishu, became staunch modernizers, trading armor for naval uniforms and building Japan's first modern navy. Others, like the Shinsengumi, a band of Kyoto-based samurai, clung to tradition so fiercely they became outlaws in the new regime. There was no single way to be a samurai at the end. There were only impossible choices between irrelevance and reinvention. What gets lost in the romanticized versions is how ordinary their struggles were. Letters from the period reveal not just defiant battle cries, but quiet desperation. Former retainers selling ancestral swords to feed families, or begging for clerical jobs in the very government that had stripped their privileges. The famed photographer Kusakabe Kimbei documented these men in the 1880s, their stiff Western suits clashing with the top knots they still refused to cut. Their faces tell the real story, pride warring with bewilderment at a world moving faster than Bushido could adapt. Yet their legacy didn't vanish with the Satsuma Rebellion's defeat. The samurai spirit found strange new outlets. Judo founder Kono Jigoro distilled combat techniques into a sport, preserving martial philosophy without the bloodshed. Nitobe Inazo's book Bushido, The Soul of Japan, repackaged the code for Western audiences, turning it into a global brand. Even Seigo Takamori got a second act posthumously pardoned. He became a national hero, his statue in Tokyo's Ueno Park depicting not a rebel, but a loyalist who loved Japan too much to accept half measures. The truth is, there was never one last samurai. There were thousands, each navigating modernity's tide in their own way. Some fell on their swords, some picked up briefcases. What united them wasn't how they fought change, but how they carried its weight, proving that even the fiercest traditions must eventually bend or break. Walk into any Japanese office today, and you might catch an echo of the samurai's disciplined spirit, not in the hum of computers, but in the unspoken codes that govern every interaction. The bow exchanged between colleagues isn't just politeness. It's a vestige of the respect warriors once showed their lords. When a salaryman works late without complaint, sacrificing personal time for the company, he's channeling the same loyalty that once bound retainers to their daimyo. Japan's corporate culture didn't inherit Bushido by accident. After World War II, as the nation rebuilt, business leaders consciously revived samurai principles to restore national identity. The result, a workforce that values harmony, precision, and collective success, modern applications of a centuries-old ethos. Martial arts offer the most visible thread connecting past and present. Kendo, the way of the sword, transforms combat into a meditative practice. Bamboo shin, I clack not to draw blood but to hone focus and character. What's striking isn't just the preservation of technique, but the philosophy behind it. A kendo match begins and ends with a bow, a ritual mirroring the etiquette of samurai duels. Even the scoring system rewards zanshin, that state of alertness after a strike, proving that true victory lies in sustained mindfulness. Similarly, Judo's founder, Kono Jigoro, distilled jujutsu's lethal throws into a sport emphasizing mutual benefit. His dojo's motto, maximum efficiency with minimum effort, could have been lifted straight from a Tokugawa-era strategy scroll. Education, too, carries the imprint of the warrior class. The emphasis on perseverance, seen in students enduring grueling entrance exams, reflects Bushido's insistence on self-mastery. School clubs, whether for baseball or calligraphy, operate with hierarchical structures reminiscent of feudal retainers serving a lord. Even the meticulous care Japanese students show their uniforms echoes the samurai's reverence for their armor and crests. This isn't nostalgia, it's cultural DNA passed down through generations who have reframed martial discipline into academic and artistic excellence. Perhaps the most unexpected legacy lies in Japan's approach to craftsmanship. The term shokunin describes artisans who pour relentless dedication into their work, whether forging knives or arranging sushi. Like swordsmiths folding steel 1,000 times, modern masters embrace perfectionism as spiritual practice. The chef Jiro Ono, whose Michelin-starred sushi restaurant requires a decade-long apprenticeship, embodies this ethos. His insistence that there's always room for improvement could have been spoken by Miyamoto Musashi refining his sword strokes. Even pop culture keeps the samurai alive. Manga like Vagabond reinterpret historical figures as flawed, relatable heroes, while video games like Ghost of Tsushima let players step into a warrior's sandals. But these aren't just entertainments, they're how new generations engage with values like honor and resilience. When a Tokyo CEO quotes Sun Tzu in a board meeting or a teenager bows after a kendo match, the samurai aren't relics. They're the silent architects of a culture that still measures worth by the depth of one's commitment and the steadiness of one's hand. Akira Kurosawa didn't just make films about samurai, he shaped how the entire world sees them. His masterpiece Seven Samurai, with its rain-soaked battles and flawed, noble warriors, became a blueprint for heroic storytelling far beyond Japan. Watch any scene of Toshiro Mifune's wild, unpredictable Kikuchiyo, and you're seeing the DNA of every rebellious action hero that followed. Even George Lucas openly borrowed from Kurosawa's The Hidden Fortress when crafting Star Wars, turning the samurai's stoic honor into the Jedi's spiritual code. Obi-Wan Kenobi's wisdom, Darth Vader's masked menace, even the climactic duel in The Empire Strikes Back, all owe debts to samurai cinema's visual and emotional language. But Kurosawa was only the beginning. Anime like Samurai Champloo mashed up Edo-era swordplay with hip-hop beats, proving these warriors could thrive in any genre. Video games took the fascination further. Ghost of Tsushima didn't just let players wield a katana, it immersed them in Bushido's moral dilemmas. Do you face enemies head-on with honor, or ambush them from the shadows to survive? Even Cyberpunk 2077 sneaked in a neon-lit Ronin subplot, showing how effortlessly the archetype adapts to dystopian futures. The samurai's pop culture appeal lies in their contradictions. They're disciplined yet rebellious, bound by code yet endlessly reinterpreted. Comics turn them into mutants Wolverine's Japan Saga, or spacefaring heroes Star Wars Mandalorians are essentially Ronin in armor. Meanwhile, Blue Eye Samurai, a Netflix hit, reimagines them through a mixed-race protagonist's rage, proving their stories still resonate with modern struggles for identity and justice. What's fascinating is how these portrayals oscillate between myth and reality. The Last Samurai romanticized Seigo Takamori's rebellion, while 13 assassins wallowed in the era's brutality. Yet both versions thrive because the samurai represent something universal, the tension between individual purpose and societal duty. Whether it's a black and white Kurosawa duel or Elden Ring's spectral warriors, their allure endures because they're not just fighters, they're mirrors for our own battles with honor, change, and legacy. The creation of a katana was never just metalwork, it was a sacred ritual, a marriage of fire and devotion. Master swordsmiths would purify themselves before entering the forge, their workshops more akin to temples than workshops. With each strike of the hammer, they weren't just shaping steel, they were breathing life into a blade destined to carry a warrior's soul. The Tamahagane steel, smelted from iron sand in clay furnaces, was folded hundreds of times, alternating layers like the pages of a holy text. This relentless process didn't just remove impurities, it aligned the metal's grain into waves, giving the blade its legendary flexibility and razor's edge. A single katana could take months to complete, its curvature perfected not by tools, but by the smith's intuition honed through decades of apprenticeship. What set these blades apart wasn't just craftsmanship, it was philosophy. The differential hardening technique created the katana's iconic hammer line, where the edge's harder steel met the spine's softer core. This wasn't merely functional, it was spiritual. The wavy pattern symbolized the boundary between life and death, a visual reminder of the sword's dual nature as both protector and destroyer. Legends speak of master smiths like Masamune, whose blades were said to cut falling silk scarves midair without disturbing their drift. His rival Muramosa's swords, by contrast, were feared as bloodthirsty, their edges allegedly driving wielders to madness, a testament to how deeply culture believed a smith's spirit infused his work. Even the polishing was an art form. A master polisher used 6 different grades of stone, each stroke revealing the steel's hidden beauty. The final finish wasn't just for shine, it exposed the jihada, the metal's grain pattern, as unique as a fingerprint. Collectors today pay fortunes for antique katanas not because they're sharp, but because they're living history. The blade wielded by Date Masamune in the 17th century still gleams with the same cold precision it had when he unified northern Japan, its edge untouched by centuries. Modern science confirms what samurai intuited. Electron microscopes reveal how the folding process creates nanostructures in the steel, making it simultaneously harder and more shock-absorbent than European broadswords. Yet no lab can replicate the intangible the way a master smith's final prayer, whispered as he quenched the red-hot blade in water, seemed to seal his intent into the metal. When a samurai drew his katana, he wasn't just holding a weapon, he was gripping centuries of tradition, a sliver of the divine forged by human hands. The path to becoming a samurai began not with a sword, but with a single grain of rice. At age 5, boys of warrior families were given their first lesson in discipline, balancing the grain on chopsticks without dropping it. This seemingly simple exercise taught patience, precision, and the unshakable focus that would define their lives. By 7, they held wooden practice swords. By 12, they could recite classical poetry between archery drills. Their education was a tapestry woven equally of silk and steel, where mastering the brush was as vital as mastering the bow. Physical training bordered on brutal. Dawn began with hours of subtly repetitive sword strikes until arms burned and blisters burst. Archery practice demanded hitting moving targets from galloping horses, the impact of each missed shot measured in welts from instructors' bamboo rods. But pain was never the point. The goal was mushin, no mind, that state where technique flowed without thought, where arrow met target before the archer fully registered the release. Legendary swordsmen like Tsukahara Bokuden spoke of battles won before blades crossed, their victory secured in the 1,000 practice strikes no one witnessed. Yet the dojo was only half their classroom. Samurai children studied Confucian classics to understand duty, composed poetry to refine their expression, and practiced tea ceremony to master presence. A warlord who couldn't distinguish good calligraphy from bad risked being swindled by deceptive scrolls. A negotiator without knowledge of seasonal poetry might offend a potential ally with clumsy words. The famed strategist Takedo Shingen reportedly kept a volume of Sun Tzu's Art of War beside his pillow and a flute beside his armor, each equally essential to leadership. Etiquette was weaponized. The precise angle of a bow conveyed subtle hierarchies. The arrangement of guest seating could prevent duels or provoke them. Young samurai learned to detect hidden daggers in compliments, to spot treachery in the slightest hesitation before a toast. Their upbringing produced men who could kill with a glance or charm with a verse, often in the same evening. The ultimate test came in shujyo austere pilgrimages where youths traveled alone, testing skills against wandering masters. Some sought out Kamiizumi Nobutsuna, the sword saint who taught not just technique but spiritual clarity. Others meditated under icy waterfalls until their trembling bodies forgot cold existed. These trials weren't about proving strength, but erasing the line between training and living. When the philosopher Yamaga Soko declared, "A warrior must be awake even in sleep," he meant every moment was preparation for that split second when life hung on instinct honed through relentless repetition. What's often forgotten is how many failed. For every Musashi Miyamoto who emerged from this crucible a legend, countless others broke under pressure, fleeing their clans, succumbing to madness, or simply vanishing into peasant obscurity. The system prized perfection because anything less could mean death on the battlefield or disgrace in court. Yet those who endured became more than fighters. They were living paradoxes, cultured executioners, poets who understood violence as deeply as beauty, and guardians of a way of life that demanded everything and gave nothing but purpose in return. The emperor sat enthroned in Kyoto, bathed in sacred regalia and centuries of divine myth, yet the samurai kneeling before him often held the real power. This paradox defined Japan's feudal politics, a celestial sovereign who ruled by heavenly mandate, and warrior lords who governed by steel and pragmatism. To outsiders, it seemed a contradiction. To the samurai, it was a balancing act woven into the fabric of their existence. They paid ceremonial homage to the emperor while swearing fealty to the shogun, their true commander. The imperial court retained its rituals, the poetry contests, the intricate dances, but when orders needed enforcing or wars waging, it was the shogun's seal that moved armies. Some emperors accepted this shadow rule with quiet resignation. Others, like Go-Daigo in the 14th century, rebelled spectacularly. His audacious attempt to overthrow the Kamakura shogunate in 1331 wasn't just a power grab, it was a celestial revolt. By rallying disaffected samurai to his cause, he briefly shattered the status quo, proving that even divine rulers could play political chess. His victory was short-lived. The Ashikaga shogunate soon replaced the old regime, but the message lingered. The throne wasn't entirely toothless. The Tokugawa era refined this dance to an art form. Emperors became cultural figureheads, their courtly duties limited to appointing shoguns, who already held the real authority, and presiding over symbolic ceremonies. The shogunate, meanwhile, lavished the imperial family with luxuries but kept them financially dependent, ensuring they lacked the means to raise armies. It was a velvet cage gilded with tradition. When Emperor Komei dared to oppose the shogunate's treaties with Western powers in the 1860s, his sudden illness and death sent a clear warning about the limits of imperial dissent. Yet samurai loyalty wasn't blind. The very Bushido code that demanded obedience also prized moral judgment. When the Meiji Restoration toppled the shogunate in 1868, it wasn't peasants or merchants who led the charge, it was samurai from Satsuma and Choshu domains. They justified their rebellion by claiming to restore the emperor's rightful power, a clever framing that masked their own ambitions. The irony, in returning authority to the throne, they effectively ended both the shogunate and their own warrior class, trading feudal loyalty for a modern nation-state. What's often overlooked is how this tension shaped Japan's identity. The emperor's spiritual authority gave the shogunate legitimacy. The shogun's military might protected the throne's mystique. Like yin and yang, they needed each other even as they resisted. This delicate balance explains why Japan never descended into the warlord anarchy seen in other feudal societies. The throne was the glue, fragile, often ignored, but ultimately unbreakable. Modern Japan still bears the imprint of this dance. The emperor remains a symbol of unity, his role carefully circumscribed by democracy's rules, an echo of the old boundaries between reverence and realpolitik. The samurai are gone, but their lesson endures. That power wears many masks, and sometimes the most formidable rulers are those who never unsheath a sword. When Portuguese traders first washed ashore on Tangashima Island in 1543, the samurai who met them faced something far stranger than any enemy they'd encountered before. These pale foreigners with their towering ships and booming arquebus rifles might as well have sailed from the moon, yet within months, Japanese blacksmiths were reverse engineering those firearms, producing matchlocks they called Tangashima, with such precision that European visitors marveled at their craftsmanship. This moment captures the samurai's paradoxical relationship with the outside world, fiercely resistant to foreign ideologies, yet ruthlessly pragmatic about adopting superior technology. The Jesuits who followed the traders found equally mixed reception. Some daimyo, like Oda Nobunaga, welcomed Christian missionaries as political tools to undermine Buddhist warrior monks who opposed him. He even wore European-style cloaks and hosted lavish dinners where samurai drank Portuguese wine from ornate chalices. But others saw Christianity as a Trojan horse, its teachings of equality, threatening the rigid social order that kept warriors atop the feudal pyramid. When Toyotomi Hideyoshi rose to power, he banned missionaries in 1587, crucifying 26 Christians 6 years later, not just for their faith, but as a warning against foreign allegiances. What's often forgotten is how deeply these brief encounters reshaped Japan. Firearms revolutionized warfare, forcing samurai to abandon centuries of cavalry tactics for massed infantry lines. Castle designs morphed to withstand cannon fire, their sloping stone walls echoing European fortresses. Even fashion-changed kimono sleeves grew narrower after samurai realized wide sleeves could catch on matchlock mechanisms. Yet for all this adaptation, the core of Bushido remained untouched. A Tangashima might win battles, but it could never replace the soul of the katana. The Shimabara Rebellion of 1638 became the turning point. When Christian peasants and Ronin rose up in Kyushu, the shogunate crushed them with overwhelming force, then used the uprising as justification to seal Japan's borders. For the next 200 years, samurai became the enforcers of sakoku, the closed country policy. Dutch traders were confined to a tiny artificial island in Nagasaki harbor, their movements monitored like criminals. Any foreign ship that approached Japan's shores risked being fired upon by coastal batteries manned by warriors who'd once eagerly studied European maps. This isolation wasn't just xenophobia, it was cultural triage. The Tokugawa shogunate had seen how Spanish colonies in the Philippines fell under foreign rule, and they were determined to preserve Japan's essence. Samurai, now more bureaucrats than battlefield fighters, became the guardians of this purity. They studied Confucian classics instead of Portuguese, practiced tea ceremony instead of Catholic Mass, and polished ancestral swords rather than test-firing new muskets. When Commodore Perry's black ships arrived in 1853 demanding Japan open for trade, it wasn't just a policy change they triggered. It was the collapse of a world the samurai had spent 2 centuries defending. The tragedy of their isolation lies in what might have been. Dutch medical texts smuggled into Nagasaki sparked advances in anatomy, while secret studies of Western astronomy improved calendar accuracy. Some forward-thinking daimyo maintained clandestine libraries of foreign books, their pages filled with sketches of steam engines and democratic parliaments. Had Japan balanced openness with discernment as Nobunaga once did, the samurai might have guided their nation into modernity rather than becoming its casualties. Their story serves as a timeless lesson. Walls keep traditions alive, but they also cast long shadows. Hollywood would have you believe every samurai was a stoic guardian of honor, his blade drawn only in righteous defense of the weak. The truth, many were little more than glorified thugs with licenses to kill. Take the infamous Matsudaira Goemon, a 16th century warlord who crucified rebellious peasants along highways as warnings, his family crest fluttering gaily above the impaled bodies. Or the Akuto, bandit gangs of disgraced samurai who terrorized trade routes, their loyalty extending no further than the next purse of stolen coins. Even the revered Minamoto Musashi wasn't above dirty tactics. His legendary duel against Sasaki Kojiro began with him arriving hours late to unnerve his opponent, then finishing the fight with a wooden oar carved into a sword-like shape, hardly the stuff of chivalric myth. The romantic image of unwavering loyalty crumbles under historical scrutiny. During the Sengoku period's chaos, samurai switched allegiances with the pragmatism of modern free agents. H.I. Mitsuhide's betrayal of Oda Nobunaga at Honno-ji Temple wasn't some anomaly. It was standard practice in an era where survival trumped Bushido platitudes. Daimyo maintained elaborate spy networks precisely because they knew their retainers' vows were negotiable. The so-called way of the warrior often boiled down to cold calculus. When the Taikta clan fell at Nagashino, their famed cavalry abandoned decades of loyalty, scattering like leaves in the wind. Even their famed discipline could veer into brutality. Samurai law granted them the right of kiri-suit gomen to cut down any commoner who showed disrespect on the spot. Diaries from Edo period merchants described terror at encountering drunk warriors on night patrols, knowing a poorly timed sneeze could mean decapitation. The 1701 incident that inspired the 47 Ronin. It began when a provincial lord slashed a corrupt official for insulting him, an act of pride, not justice. The darkest open secret, many weren't even skilled fighters. By the Tokugawa peace, most samurai were paper-pushing bureaucrats whose swords rusted in scabbards. When the Meiji Restoration demanded actual combat, their clumsiness with modern rifles proved fatal. The Satsuma Rebellion's tragic irony was watching warriors who'd spent generations polishing ceremonial armor get mowed down by conscript farmers with Gatling guns. Yet this complexity makes them fascinating. They weren't saints or demons, but flawed men navigating a ruthless world. The same hands that penned exquisite haiku could order village burnings. A single lifetime might see a warrior compose love poems in Kyoto one year and massacre rival clans the next. Their legacy isn't tarnished by these contradictions, it's deepened. To strip away the myth is to meet the real samurai, not marble statues but flesh and blood humans whose choices, noble and monstrous, shaped a nation. The boardroom might seem worlds apart from the battlefield, but the principles that guided samurai lords 8 centuries ago now shape Fortune 500 companies. Take the concept of servant leadership, the idea that true authority comes from elevating others. It's Bushido's benevolence, virtue reborn in modern suits. Toyota's famed Kaizen philosophy of continuous improvement mirrors the samurai's relentless honing of craft, where mastery wasn't a destination but a lifelong pursuit. Even Silicon Valley's embrace of fail fast, fail forward echoes the warrior's resilience. Minamoto Musashi lost his first duel at 13, only to refine his strategy into undefeated supremacy. Athletes channel Bushido's mental discipline in ways that would make ancient swordsmen nod in recognition. Novak Djokovic's pre-match meditation rituals are practically zazen in Nikes, a practice as focused as any archer's breath control before releasing an arrow. The Japanese term kiai, the spirited shout in martial arts, has infiltrated tennis grunts and weightlifters' explosive exhales, transforming exertion into focused energy. Kobe Bryant's infamous Mamba mentality wasn't just about outworking opponents. It was the modern equivalent of a samurai's Mushin state, where hours of grueling practice created instinct sharper than intention. What's most surprising is how Bushido's ethics resonate beyond Japan. Starbucks' Howard Schultz credits the samurai concept of Meiyo honor for his decision to provide employee health care, a move that boosted loyalty and productivity. The U.S. Marine Corps Leadership Manual explicitly references Bushido's emphasis on leading by example, while Navy SEAL training embraces the samurai's tolerance for suffering as a path to growth. Even in medicine, surgeons speak of the warrior's mindset when entering high-stakes operations, where a single moment's hesitation can alter fates. Yet the true test of Bushido's relevance lies in its adaptability. Modern interpretations replace feudal loyalty with corporate vision statements, but the core remains purpose beyond profit. When Patagonia's founder donated his company to fight climate change, it wasn't just philanthropy, it was jiri, the duty to repay one's debts to society. The samurai would have understood. Their code wasn't about blind obedience, but about aligning actions with something greater than oneself. In an age of quarterly earnings and viral fame, that lesson might be their sharpest blade. The samurai didn't just wield swords, they shaped the very soul of Japan, leaving fingerprints on everything from ink paintings to corporate boardrooms. Their journey from provincial enforcers to feudal lords and finally to cultural icons mirrors the evolution of a nation that learned to balance steel with silk. What makes their legacy extraordinary isn't just the battles they won, but the contradictions they embodied. Warriors who composed poetry, killers who practiced Zen, and rulers who understood that true power often lay in restraint. Even in disappearance, they achieved a kind of immortality. The katana may have sheathed its final blade, but the samurai's essence lingers wherever discipline meets creativity, or when ordinary people choose integrity over convenience. Consider the quiet persistence of a Tokyo chef slicing sashimi with ceremonial precision, his knife work echoing the focus of a swordsman's strike. Or the salaryman bowing deeply to a client, his respect not so different from a retainer's loyalty to his lord. These aren't empty rituals, they're threads in a tapestry woven by centuries of warrior ethos. Modern Japan's global reputation for excellence, its bullet trains arriving to the second, its artisans perfecting single crafts over lifetimes, stems from this same relentless pursuit of mastery. The samurai didn't just leave behind armor and scrolls, they encoded their values into a national DNA. Yet their greatest lesson transcends borders. In an age of fleeting trends and fractured attention, their commitment to lifelong improvement feels almost radical. The way a swordsman practiced 10,000 cuts to hone a single motion finds its parallel in today's athletes, artists, and innovators who understand that greatness is a mosaic of mundane repetitions. Even their flaws, the brutal caste system, the suppression of dissent, serve as warnings about the cost of clinging too tightly to tradition. Their story isn't a fairy tale, but a mirror reflecting both the heights and shadows of human potential. Perhaps that's why their influence refuses to fade. From Silicon Valley CEOs quoting Musashi's strategy to protesters invoking Bushido's courage in the face of oppression, the samurai spirit adapts to every era. They remind us that honor isn't inherited, it's chosen daily in how we meet challenges and treat those around us. Their world of cherry blossoms and blood-stained blades may be gone, but their questions endure. What do we stand for? What will we sacrifice to protect it? The answers, like the warriors themselves, are etched not in steel, but in the choices we make long after the battle cries have faded.